What do you remember about the hype surrounding Brock Lesnar's UFC debut?
Yeah, I think anybody that's ever been around Brock for more than 30 seconds, the word phony would never enter your
No.
vocabulary. Brock was, a machine, and Brock was a great amateur wrestler, legitimate tough guy. And Brock entering UFC from the vantage point from where we were, it was like, okay, hey, Brock is going in to represent the business, if you will, because other than Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn to a lesser extent, you never really had anybody of that magnitude in UFC. Um, Kenny was a huge name in UFC, probably a bigger name in UFC than he was in WWE. Brock was a big name in WWE going into the UFC. But it was more of a, I think guys genuinely liked Brock too, wanted to see him succeed, but more than anything, didn't want him to embarrass the wrestling business by, going in and getting destroyed. And, Brock's a badass. That's all you can really say about that, because the son of a bitch went out there and made things happen, and was a hell of a legitimate athlete, legitimate great wrestler.
Well, as we know, the first fight didn't go his way.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks assumed he would bully Frank Mir, and that looked like it was going to be the case. Once they went to the ground, Frank Mir knew more about jiu-jitsu than old Brock Lesnar did at the time, and Brock winds up having to tap out after a leg lock here. Were you surprised that Brock didn't win?
I was.
UFC?
Yeah, I was definitely shocked that Brock didn't win, especially even just kind of looking at the size difference. And Brock was a pure amateur wrestler, and it was Brock's first time in the octagon. Frank had experience, so it's not like there's no shame in losing to Frank Mir.
Right.
But I think Brock avenged that loss, when he came back and did it again. And it was like, all right, there's the Brock Lesnar that can go. So it was, yeah, it was crazy, because at first, man, Brock came out like a just, holy shit, this is going to be short and this is going to be ugly. And Frank with his jiu-jitsu skills, which are different than mat wrestling.
Yes.
And I don't know how much Brock trained in jiu-jitsu and that type of grappling, if you will. Man, you want to go on the mat with Brock, I'll still put him and Kurt up against practically anybody. But yeah, just it was a shame. But I thought that he, in the beginning, few seconds of that match, Brock went out and showed, holy shit, there's something there. I don't think people left going, boy, that guy's got nothing. I think people went, holy shit, man. If Brock can learn a little more just jujitsu, and if he could learn just a little more over here, and striking and this and how not to get caught, then he would be the force that he eventually became.
We know that those early UFCs with Brock, man, the crowd was just littered with WWE Hall of Famers and current roster talent. And I assume it was a big topic of conversation in the locker room, because I know in the coming years with Brock's success, it would often be a discussion that we would see online or in interviews, because the UFC is going to just explode in popularity, and people would say, "Oh, I might have tried that if things had gone a little different, or if I had been born a little later, or whatever the case may be." But I'm curious, from Vince McMahon's standpoint, we've often heard that he sort of lived, for lack of a better phrase, in a wrestling bubble, so he wasn't keeping up with Seinfeld or what was hot on TV, or maybe his favorite football player really was Wahoo McDaniel, but he was just sort of one track focused on wrestling. I'm curious, do you remember?
Wahoo was my favorite football player too.
Of course. What do you remember him having an interest in how Brock was doing in the UFC? Do you think that would have been a show that he would have watched just because it was Brock?
I believe he did watch it. I don't think he watched it live, but
Right.
I know he watched it. Just wanted to see how Brock did. Sure.